and get us fired up over here so that we can say hi to our live audience. And I want to start off by saying hello to everybody. Welcome so much. I am Allie. Yes, hi, Internet. I am Allie Kravitz. I'm also known as the BronxWitch, and I am the owner of BronxWitch HeadQuarters. We are the Bronx's only metaphysical bookstore and workshare space, and we aim to be the hub for all things witchy in the Bronx and perhaps in New York City, though there are many other wonderful shops. We do feel that we are special and a little bit different because we really focus on the education and the spiritual development of folks who are interested in witchcraft, in divination, and in spiritual practices in general. So I want to thank you guys so much for being here. I want to say hello to our internet family. We are live streaming right now to our virtual Coven community. The Coven community is a monthly membership space, kind of similar to a Facebook group. And in that space, there are discussion feeds to chat with other witches. There's about 100 people in the group now, so we're really proud of that. There are monthly discount codes that are posted, exclusive events like behind the scenes at our ticketed events and things of this nature that you can tune into for free because you're a monthly member. We have a book club that meets every month. We have a Witches of Color support group. So there's a lot of really cool spaces and things going on in there. So if you guys aren't Coven community members, consider joining us in that space. And our Coven community members are with us right now. They're going to be able to tune in, which is pretty cool. I want to introduce David, really somebody who needs no introduction. I think at this point, we have gotten the opportunity to speak with David on the Better Witch podcast and get to know him. And you folks have been getting excited about getting your hands on a copy of the book, and I imagine learning more about David on your own. But David is a shaman, and I think that's really beautiful because we hear that word thrown around a lot, but without really the proper context, I think, and perhaps by folks that don't really know quite as much about the history of that practice and what it means to truly be called ancestrally to do this type of work. So I consider it an incredible honor and blessing to know David, to be able to say that I know an actual shaman, as opposed to like some of the things you might see on the news, and people running around calling themselves shamans. And I'm really grateful that David would spend this afternoon with us, share more about his lineage, his practice, and answer our questions. I'm going to give David the opportunity to introduce himself, so I don't want to be repetitive and give you the full bio. David's going to also be reading some portions of the book that are also going to shed some light on his background and how he has come to walk in this path, as well as some parts of the book that I think are particularly interesting. So definitely feel free to read along in your own books or dog favorite pages to come back to later. And then once we're done with the reading, we'll open it up to questions. So if you have questions, just jot them down or make a note of it. We will have a Q&A segment. And folks who are watching virtually, if you guys have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. I will read them to David when we get to that portion of the afternoon together. And then after that, we get to mingle. So there's cookies, there's tea and coffee, and you guys can hang out and continue to enjoy and chat with David before we wrap things up this afternoon. All right. Thank you guys so much. David, I turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you.
Yay! Welcome.
So, as mentioned already, David. So just a quick, I'm going to go into the preface in a minute just to, kind of show, highlight the journey that I took to get where I am. But I first want to, clarify something. So, mysteries and magic of North Asian shamanism. I think, first of all, it'd be good to give a sense or definition of what North Asia is. So North Asia is actually one of the least known parts of Asia, even among Asians, because it's one of the least populated places. It's people tend to forget that it's there. So and also only one group of people actually has their own country, Mongolia. None of the other North Asian peoples have their own country. We're all either part of Russia, the Russian Siberia, or through China, which is Northeast China. So North Asia, if I were to define it just regionally, it basically includes the country of Mongolia, Russian Siberia, basically, if you have any sense of where the Ural Mountains are, it's basically east of the Ural Mountains. Basically, the pretty much all of Siberia is basically within that, as well as two regions within China. One is known as Inner Mongolia. Fun fact, Mongolia, the country, does not encompass all of actual Mongolia. The other half is actually controlled by China. It's actually a province of China known as Inner Mongolia. And then Manchuria to the east, which is, if you kind of have an image of what China looks like, it's that part that juts out in the northeast. And that's where I'm from. I am ethnically Manchurian. I do include a lot of maps in this book just to make things easier. The first one is on page 4. So that actually gives, a little bit of, it doesn't draw the countries, but it shows roughly, where each of the regions are. So with myself, I am ethnically Manchurian, but with a mix of other things. And I guess with that, I'll dive into the preface a little bit. So I guess I'll just I'll read the preface, and then you can follow along to try to see where I'm coming from, and I'll give some explanations as I go through. So, as an Asian American growing up in New Jersey, where I'm originally from, I had little interest in exploring my ancestral culture or heritage. Actually, why would I pursue an identity that at the time had made me a target of mockery, insensitive jokes, condescension, and even bullying, school stuff. Like many other Asian Americans in their teenage years, I want to assimilate into Western values and lifestyle and tone down or distance myself from my Asian roots. But of course, my spirits had other plans. My family had always told me that we were Manchus mixed with Han Chinese. Now, when you think of China Chinese, it's actually Han Chinese. So when you think of Chinese culture, Han Chinese people make up 92% of the population of China. So if you think of Chinatown or Flushing, that's all Han Chinese. Yeah. So, but for all intents and purposes, Manchus were now quote unquote Chinese, and thus no different from the Han. In fact, most Manchus in China today identify themselves as Chinese both politically and nationally, and would at most identify themselves with Dongbei or Northeast Chinese culture. We have our own little variants over there. So my family was no exception. Although they knew we had Manchu roots, they really did not place much importance on it. But in 2009, I started having dreams of my Manchu ancestors. They showed up. They told me to study about them, to learn about their history, their culture, their identity. And Manchus, even whether academically or historically, we are known to take dream divination very seriously. So so this message awoke in me a passion to explore just who these mysterious ancestors were. So those who knew me between 2009 and 2013 referred to me as the Manchu guy, someone who proudly identified himself as Manchu, a race and culture that many had either never heard of or believed to be long dead. I became an expert on Manchu history and culture and their legacy in China. I even voiced controversial opinions about the Qing dynasty and the short-lived Japanese puppet state of Manchu Kuo. To provide a little bit of context here. So as Manchus, one of the most famous things about us is that we invaded China and established a dynasty known as the Qing dynasty. And this is the last dynasty that ruled China. So if you ever thought about why, in that era, they tied their hair in ponytails, shaved the front of their heads, and dressed very differently from how, let's just say, Mulan would dress. That's the reason why. We invaded China and we forced Chinese people to kind of look like us, but then it backfired because now people think that's Chinese. So basically after we were overthrown, that's basically when things went crazy. So there's just some historical context. So when I was in middle and high school, this is going back a little bit, given just my spiritual inclinations, I naturally became interested in things like witchcraft and neo-paganism. And in 2012, which was when I came to New York, I began interacting with New York's pagan community, attending public rituals, workshops, classes, connecting with many members of New York's witchcraft community. And at the time, I also came across teachers from both the African American hoodoo tradition as well as the Norse, rune traditions. And I studied under them in order to, expand my knowledge. And, like a lot of people, initially I wanted to use magic and witchcraft just, for my own personal, goals, especially in instances when my own, academic studies or hard work was not paying off, when you study for a test and you're not getting that good grade, that kind of situation, getting a job, all that stuff. But the more I went through all these, the more I realized that I had a deep hunger for magical practice. And even my own ancestors were encouraging me to continue studying magic, specifically folk magic, interestingly enough. And especially the folk magic of other cultures, and especially the other cultures that exist in America, on this land that I'm in. So fast forward a little bit, in 2014, my ancestral dreams returned, telling me to explore the shamanic traditions of my Manchu heritage. In this, I had very little success. Many researchers only mention Manchu shamanism in passing, often in the footnote and frequently in broad generalizations. Basically, mostly in academic papers, there was very little. It'd just be like, oh, they practice shamanism. They use this room for shamanism, and that was it, nothing else. But eventually, my ancestors told me to start to observe and study the shamanism of the Manchu's neighbors in order to better understand Manchu shamanism itself. And this gave me a pretty good starting point. To the south of Manchuria were the Han Chinese, China proper. And they had strong animistic, spiritual, and magical beliefs, although technically not shamanic, so not exactly relevant. To the east were the Koreans. They still have a vibrant shamanic tradition. They call their shamans mudangs. They sometimes say mugyo mudang. And then to the north were, the Siberians. The Siberian peoples up there, the Tungusic peoples, the Turkic and Mongolic peoples there. And then to the west was the country of Mongolia. So of all of these, the Mongols probably have actually the most vibrant and strongest living tradition to this day. In Mongolia, you can throw a stone, it'll hit a shaman somewhere. They're everywhere. Not all of them are good though, but they're everywhere. But thanks to the late Bordeaux American shaman Sarangarel, she passed away about a decade ago. The tradition of the Siberian Bordeaux Mongols were probably the most accessible. Her works, even including mine here, her works still remain one of the few English language resources written by a traditional shaman that actually gives practical information on tools and techniques. So I can give information on her books if you're interested in that as well. But most other resources otherwise were written by academic researchers and anthropologists, so very detached, very dry, not page turners by any means. And so, the more I studied, the more I realized I couldn't rely on, just these written things anymore. I had to engage a community to further expand, what I knew. So, and specifically one that was not what I wrote in here, corrupted by Western New Age beliefs or the core shamanism practice developed by Michael Harder that was widely practiced in the US. So, a little bit of context here. There was this guy named Michael Harder in the 70s. He wrote a book called The Way of the Shaman, and he basically introduced a technique that he calls core shamanism. And what it basically does is that it basically pulls specific practices from North Asia, Siberia, as well as South America, and some Native American traditions, kind of mishmashed them together, and then took the cultural specific aspects out of it, and then basically marketed that as core shamanism, basically what he called shamanic techniques that anyone can do. And basically, if you ever heard the term shamanic journeying, that's where it comes from. Or if any of you have heard of power animals, which is drawn from Native American spirit animal concepts, also from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bamboozles. We've all been bamboozled.
Yeah, and obviously that basically popularized the word here in the US since the 70s. And that's why every other person likes to call themselves a shaman.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, so I want to find a community that was not that, in other words.
Yeah.
So ironically, one day during a Google search, I accidentally slipped into a light trance, and as something that frequently happens with people who are what we call born shamans, if they're not initiated, they frequently slip into like small trances just here and there throughout the day. It's actually considered very not dangerous, but very vulnerable for them because it's something that we're meant to control. But obviously at the time I had no control. So it happened while I was on Google. But I think, like through that trance, my spirits actually led me to search up specific words. These specific words were 3 worlds shamanism, and that actually led me to a guy named Nicholas Breeze-Wood, who you may or may not see on Facebook. He's basically an angry old man who yells at New Age people all the time. But yeah, he runs a magazine called Sacred Hoop, and he actually has, I'm just paraphrasing what I'm writing here. So he basically runs this magazine, and he has a very, very wide network of traditional shamanic practitioners from all around the world. And basically when I connected with him, he was able to introduce me to a lot of these other peoples, including people in Mongolia and Korea as well. But for a long time, this community, it was only accessible online because I'm here in the US. Most of these people in this network, because he's based in the UK, a lot of people in this network were based across Asia and Europe, not so much in North America. So basically my community in the US was, at the time especially, was primarily, Western witchcraft people, as well as a few people in the hoodoo world, a few people in just, basically in the traditions that kind of exist here. So let's see. So I don't want to take too much time with this. I'm just going to paraphrase a little bit. So even though my understanding of traditional North Asian shamanism at that time was only in its earliest stages, I really wanted to at that time just bridge an understanding between the communities I had here and the communities I had online with the traditions I was doing. So in 2016, I published my first book. At that time, when I was, when I was still in my like hoodoo and root work studies, it connected me with the Lucky Mojo crew in California. They kind of run their own publishing companies, and they convinced me to write a book. And it was only a small 100-page book, so it seemed manageable at the time. So I was persuaded to write this book because there were very few works dedicated to Asian folk magic as a whole, let alone North Asia. And that book consisted of research ranging from Sarangaro's work, the late Buryat shaman, as well as academic research papers, historical commentary on the Qing dynasty, as well as interviews with a Tuvan American shaman who I knew at the time. I have my own thoughts about that, but I'll get into that later. As well as stories from, that I collected from relatives who believed in spirits and shamanism. And although the book did introduce North Asian folk magic into the witchcraft and hoodoo communities, at the time, it was 2016, I was younger, I did not know as much then as I do now. So that book did not really address the different traditions and regional practices of North Asian spirituality, or to discuss the fluidity across these traditions and how they're affected by regional practices, which is something that I do explore in this book. Fast forward again, in 2016, the company that I worked for actually offered me the opportunity to work in Hong Kong, sort of for a couple of years on an assignment there as an expat, to basically expand our business in the region. And this pretty much aligned really well with what my experience wanted. They were like, do it. I'm trying to do that Star Wars one, do it. So basically, yeah, I packed my bags, I went. Living in Hong Kong was kind of tough for me, especially initially. Not only is it just extremely hot and humid there, but it's like city humid, so it's dirty humid. Also,
relate.
yeah. But at that time, I attempted to engage in my spiritual and magical practice there without sort of engaging with the local land spirits there first. And I'll get to this little concept a little bit later, but it's my personal belief that any magical or spiritual practice basically will involve the local land spirits to some extent. So what happened is that I kind of developed a lot of skin problems. I developed some financial difficulties, all that stuff. And also, fun fact about Hong Kong. Hong Kong's tumultuous history has created an environment that is home to many restless spirits and ghosts. So many of the spiritual traditions there center very much on family spaces, basically driving the ghosts out of their homes, or businesses, so hiring feng shui masters to design an optimal environment for their businesses, or just personal enlightenment via the Buddhism that exists there. But because of these very specific types of work, public areas are often plagued with many restless spirits who are particularly fickle and cantankerous. So, the difficulties that I experienced there, it was actually coming back here and engaging with some of my community members here. They made me realize that I had not given, the proper offerings of respect to the local land spirits there. And I wrote here, just FYI, they particularly over there enjoy fish powder, rice, and herbal teas. So as anyone was passing through that area. But once I started giving these offerings, a lot of these problems started to alleviate. But one of the great things about being in Hong Kong is that it allowed me to explore the many different forms of spirituality around Asia. Hong Kong has one thing I'll say about them is that they have one of the best and most convenient airports, and if you're there, you can fly around all of Asia pretty easily. So my travels took me to Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines in Japan, mosques and Hindu temples in Indonesia, Buddhist and folk temples in Hong Kong, Taiwan, temples in Korea. And in Korea, I had the chance to visit some of the local Mudang shamans there. And even in Manchuria, where my family and relatives are, I reconnected with relatives and learned about the specific form of shamanism there that's practiced by the descendants of people who intermarried between the Manchus and the Han Chinese, because these lineages still kind of descended there. So one thing I want to say. Okay, I'll just move on. So, and then most significantly, at that time, I traveled to Mongolia twice. I actually went to Mongolia again for the third time this past summer. But at the time of writing this, I only went twice. So my first trip was organized by a shaman from the Halach clan. And on this trip, I met with several local Halach and Darkhat shamans and visited the large Buddhist monastery at Amakbaisgalant. On my second trip, a Darkhat shaman, who is now a very close friend of mine, took me to the remote region called Darkhat Valley. And there I met with her elders, who are actually considered some of the most powerful shamans in Mongolia today. And I also traveled to the taiga region, which is basically the coniferous permafrost region near the Russian-Mongolian border. And it's permafrost, so it's basically, there's a layer of ice underneath the ground. So above it, it's like cold but marshy at the same time. And these are very, very remote regions that cannot be reached except in specialized vehicles or on horseback. So basically, we had to transfer to a Soviet-style low fan and then transfer from that to horses to get over those mountains. So obviously, the spiritual energy was extremely intense. Overwhelming. So during my first few days, I had headaches, I had fuzzy focus, I had mood swings. It was a lot. And it was on this second trip that my friend and her elders determined that I indeed have shamanic spirits. I actually didn't know this at the time. I had an interest in this. I had no idea why. And it was her and her elders who confirmed. Several other shamans have confirmed it too, but I'm like, I don't know if I fully believe you. But with her and her elders, I'm like, okay, I believe this now. They determined that I had shamanic spirits, that I was destined to be a shaman because I was born chosen as one. So, but however, despite our friendship, I was very limited in the ceremonies in which I could participate. So I wrote in here, and I said on the podcast too, Manchus and Darkhan Mongols used to be bitter enemies during the Qing dynasty. So there was a risk that I could be, harmed if I participated in some of their ceremonies or even initiated with them. That matter. So they were very nice, very generous, but we didn't want to risk anything. So when I told those elders about the dreams I had from my ancestors and their message to explore the neighboring shaman traditions, they knew. They're like, oh yeah, that's us. So they knew that it was basically Mongol and Siberian traditions would be the most relevant. And so, again, they were very generous with teaching me some of their concepts and some of their practices. But they were very clear that there was a specific teacher that I would have to find somewhere, either among the Manchus or among the Inner Mongolians within China, to be properly taught and initiated. I'm still in that stage. I'm still looking for that person. We're also dealing with the fact that, it may, given world politics, it may or may not happen anytime soon. But that's something that we're kind of figuring out. I'm going to skip down to the end of that paragraph. They were extremely generous with me, sharing their knowledge, those teachings, and providing me with new tools after determining that some of my own were unsuitable. Literally, they saw some of my tools and were like, "Yeah, no, you can't use this." They're literally like, "Throw this away," and I'm like, "No." But then they gave me this one was one that they had forged themselves actually.
Wow.
Yeah. So fast forward, I returned to the U.S. I was still living in Asia at the time, 2016 to 2018. And end of 2018, I returned to U.S. to New York, and in early 2019, not long after, I became acquainted with this one individual called Jan Van Gieselstein, who passed away actually a couple years ago as well. She wrote a book called Spirits from the Edge of the World, and it describes in detail the beliefs and shamanic practices of a group of people known as the Uchi, or the Uchi Nanai, who are part of the Amur tribes. Now, this is a different region in North Asia. This is Southeast Siberia, so basically close to the Pacific Ocean. And so they were one of the direct northern neighbors of the Manchus and speak almost the same language, and which this individual spoke fluently. She's white, but she speaks it fluently. No one speaks this language. Most Manchus can't speak it. And although this is still not the exact tradition that I was meant to follow, it was basically I was kind of in between them. So, and learning about that tradition also helps inform me a lot of my own path as well. I knew that what I had to do in terms of my own practice was basically in between those two somewhere. Even through her work, many aspects of Manchu shamanism did become very, very clear to me. But unfortunately, she passed away in 2021. I actually missed the chance to show her this book before she had passed. So I referenced her work a lot, throughout. But her assistant, her top student, he actually was one of the endorsers of this book. So he was able to read it. But So pretty close to the end. I'll just kind of paraphrase it. In 2020, pandemic hit. World came to a standstill. I'm like, well, I guess everything's gonna go on pause for a second. But ironically, my shaman friends from the Darkhan tribe in Mongolia, she took that as an opportunity to set up private classes for specific individuals who she trusted or she had gotten to know. And so obviously through that, she shared a lot more sort of intimate teachings that on a trip she would not just disclose, but with this small group, she gave very, very deep classes, which, also obviously my spiritual journey was continuing even during the pandemic somehow. And it was in August of 2020. I don't know if any of you know about Judica. She's an acquisitions editor at Wiser. And since 2016, she's been contacting me every single year about writing a book. And every single time I said no, because partly imposter syndrome, who am I to write it, partly because I have no idea what to write about. Yeah, believe it or not. Yeah, so, but in 2020, I'm like, all right, I think I might have an idea. I took a look at my bookshelf. I took a look at what works were currently there available. Everything was very, very either academic or unavailable. There's one book I had that like retails on Amazon for $200.
Jeez.
Got it in Mongolia, the bookshop for 20. And or everything was just very, very specific on a single tribe or single group of people. Anyone who's casually reading it will go way over their heads. And I barely was able to read it together. So I had the idea of writing a book that serves as both a broad introduction as well as just broadly covering several of these different traditions because they're all very similar. They have their regional differences, but they are all very similar. So I realized that this was something that that I could try out. So as I was writing this book, I'm like, oh man, this type of book is something that I wished I had like 10 years ago, because I wish I had like a broad introduction to all these things rather than diving straight into those academic materials. And part of me also knew that once I finished writing this book and it got published, it would essentially take my journey into a different direction. Basically, it's like, all right, you've done your research on everything. Now it's time to focus on something more specific.
Yeah.
So, and this book was kind of the marker for that. So that was one reason I decided to write it, and I also want to write it for just a very wide group of people who are already in spirituality, people who want to explore authentic forms of shamanism, people who are Asian Americans who were very cut off. Asian Americans as a whole were very cut off from our heritage. Even if our parents or grandparents came from the country, there is a disconnect that's a combination of language barriers as well as through the immigrant experience, wanting to leave that behind. So a lot of Asian Americans are very cut off. So so that's kind of what I hoped for this book. And I'll read the last paragraph. I wrote, as you read this book, remember that the purpose of shamanism can be summed up in 2 words: coexistence and balance. Coexistence with our spirits and our communities, and the balance that must be preserved between all of us and within ourselves. And I wish nothing but blessings, wisdom, and peace upon you as you discover these ancient traditions. So, yeah, that took a while. Questions about, does anyone have any questions about my past?
I do. Thank you for sharing this with us. I haven't read the book, but it's somewhat of a biography, a semi-biography?
No, not at all.
Biography, not at all.
Not at all.
If I may ask a personal question, you don't have to answer them, what have you. But spirits impart things to you and they guide things to you. Did you, when you were ready to go to the next level where they gave you permission to get this information, was there like some type of ceremony, or you just knew, or the rituals, or you just?
So basically, the way that the spirits have guided me is that they've guided me to other people and other spirits, and basically just they guide me to introductions. And as they guided me to these other peoples within this network, then they determined, all right, this is what we can teach you, this is what we can't teach you, this is the ceremonies that you can witness, these are the ones you can't witness. And then so these are, so it's not so formal and structured. It's kind of like as we go. One thing I'll say about North Asian shamanism as a whole, and as well as its cultures, is that they're extremely practical. Most of these peoples are actually nomadic peoples. So it's even everything from altars to how we carry ourselves, how we practice. It's actually pretty simple. Actually, the funny thing is that if you with North Asian shamanism, the most interesting thing to look at is just what we wear, because everything else actually doesn't. If you look at it like, okay, it's like the same thing for like half an hour now. It's nothing too complex or ritualistic because it's very practical minded. We're like, all right, what do we need to do to get shit done, and then move on to the next thing.
Got you.
I apologize for the cursing.
No,
That's what it is.
Yeah.
This is BronxWitch HeadQuarters.
That is also a good point.
Yeah. We have a question, actually, if you're taking questions on your background.
Yeah.
We have a question from Cynthia in the Coven community who asks, when your ancestors come to you in dreams, or when they initially came to you in the dreams, what form were they in? Like, did you see people? Was it more like energy, or how did you know in your dreams that you were being contacted by ancestral spirits?
Most of the time, it was basically people with a domineering presence. Occasionally, it came in the form of animals that started speaking.
Oh, wow.
Basically, it's basically they took on the forms that they thought would catch my attention, and that's something I learned about spirits, is that it's the forms that they take are the ones that they think will get you to listen, or get you to pay attention. So for me, it's because one thing I didn't really quite mention, I grew up in a very atheist family, so very skeptical about all things spirituality. So if it came in the form of energy or whatever, I'd be like, I just pass it off. But that's for me. So for me, in order for them to get the message, they really have to come in strong. To really be, almost be in that, like, and they didn't even identify themselves as the ancestors. This is something I figured out later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. So I covered that, and another part I want to, Ali actually also thought would be interesting is covering what we would call shamanic initiation. Now, so one thing I do want to mention, actually as a leading up to that, so within our cultures, shamans are actually considered to be chosen by spirits. So actually our definition of a shaman is someone who was chosen by the spirits when they were born to be able to go into deliberate, controlled trance states in which they will undergo, transpossession or spirit flight, which is going into the spirit world. But a big aspect of this is that they were chosen when they were born by specific ancestral spirits who actually were shamans when they were alive. So that's why a lot of this is lineage based. But that being said, being chosen as a shaman was actually oftentimes not seen as a good thing. Actually, oftentimes it's seen as an obligation. It seems as like something they're forced to do. Sometimes some families who are more dramatic see it as a curse. So actually, while every family prior to communism did have spiritual practices, that having a shaman meant something else. It was one of self-sacrifice. So I'll go into the section on page 13, which is shamanic initiation. So at the very bottom of page 13, those identified and recognized by an experienced shaman as having been chosen by shamanic spirits must find a suitable teacher and begin training and preparing for their eventual initiation. A little bit of context. So the only way that in our cultures to confirm if you are someone who was chosen as a born shaman is to have an elder sort of check you out and see what your condition is, because normally it manifests with, actually I'll get into this later or in this paragraph. So for those who grow up on their ancestral lands within their own cultural community, these teachers are often shamans who recognize them or one of their colleagues, in which more and more people are, and are therefore not hard to identify. In today's global society, in which more and more people are born and raised outside of their ancestral lands, this process can obviously be more challenging. Some say that if those recognized as having shamanic spirits don't have good karma, they may never find their teachers. Because the spirits will continue to induce the signs of calling via shamanic sickness, however, they will ultimately live harsh, unfulfilled, quote-unquote, half-lives. So I'm currently in this stage. I've been recognized by both Darkhan Mongol shamans as well as Korean shamans as having shamanic spirits, but I'm still searching for the teacher. I don't have such strong sickness anymore because of the fact that I have received so many teachings. It's kind of like it's more than a band-aid. It's basically moving me along the process so my spirits know that they don't have to push, so that I'm already aware, that I'm already doing things about it. So why is it so important for those called to be shamans to find the right teachers as opposed to simply initiating and training under the shamans who identified them? I touched on this a little bit. There are many complicated reasons for this, but the most important is the compatibility of ancestral spirits. For those born within a shamanic culture, this is not a problem usually, but for those born into a different culture, several issues may arise. In the best case scenario, the ancestors of these, pre-shaman, not yet initiated shamans, their ancestors may not recognize the practices of these teacher spirits. So while they may try to help, aspiring shamans may ultimately be unable to perform as effectively using their teachers' practices because their spirits are like, I don't know what's happening. In other words, they will not be as powerful as they could be under teachers with compatible shamanic spirits. In the worst case scenario, these spirits may be from a culture that is still considered to be an enemy of the student's culture, or vice versa, which is what I came across. If this is the case, the student's initiation and training may anger the spirits, who may try to hurt or kill the students or even their teachers. So good teachers will often recognize if this is the case and will refuse to initiate or train students for safety reasons, even if they are recognized and even if they have good relationships with those teachers, such as I have. So in cultures that perform formal initiation ceremonies, it is incumbent upon teachers to perform the ceremonies properly. Today, there is a dangerous rise in the number of initiation ceremonies performed quickly or carelessly by New Age teachers, even within those cultures. So, believe it or not, these cultures that still have living shamanic lineages from ancient times, they have their own versions of New Age that is popping up. I almost laugh. I almost want to call it like self-appropriation. Like they take concepts from their own culture, but then twist it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very wild. And this has resulted in repercussions that include harm, as well as accidents and even premature death. The number of stories that I've heard, and the few that I've actually know about directly from people that I know, getting into car accidents, getting into these accidents within the same week after they go through these ceremonies that are improperly done. It's kind of frightening actually. So every North Asian culture has different initiation practices and structures. While some cultures like the Turkic Siberians and the Darkhan Mongols have a single stage ceremony and emphasize ongoing learning and even renewal ceremonies. Drink of water. Other cultures like the Buryats have multiple initiation stages that take place throughout the shaman's lifetime. In both cases, however, shaman training is a lifelong process because shamans are expected to continuously learn throughout their time on Earth. And this is one of the reasons why my spirits actually encourage me to learn sort of spiritual magical practices from other cultures as well, because we consider our practices to be constantly evolving. So, although here I place emphasis on human teachers, all North Asian cultures pretty much agree that initiation and the ongoing learning process are primarily conducted by the spirits. Human teachers are required to prepare for and perform the steps for the physical ceremonies and to teach young shamans how to connect with their spirits properly. But it is then the spirits who teach them the insights, the wisdom, and the sacred practices. Sometimes young shamans act as apprentices to older shamans, as with the Darkhan Mongols, just helping them with their mundane, everyday tasks and responsibilities in return for instruction. But in other cultures, like the Ulchi tribe in Southeast Siberia, they don't have a formal apprentice relationship, but rather multiple human teachers serve as sort of mentors and guides for the young shaman in their beginning stages of like self-initiation or self-learning. But even in those cases, multiple teachers will perform what they call road opening ceremonies and basically sing for the young shaman so that the initiation process can be smooth and just removing the obstacles from it. But nonetheless, it is important to remember that shamanism is not a set of official teachings. Shamans are chosen by the spirits. And I hear no one can quote unquote learn to be a shaman. And I'll add the caveat, even though no one can learn to be a shaman, it's basically saying that no one can learn to be this role, but everyone can learn techniques and practices to enhance their own spiritual journey. So it's this particular, so basically everyone can learn first aid, but not everyone can learn to be a surgeon.
Yeah.
And then I thought this might be interesting is to talk about, so the next section is the first shamans. So, shamans are almost always chosen from families that have ancestors who are also shamans. So naturally, whenever I say this, people come up to me and say, so who were the first shamans? And how were they chosen if they didn't have shamanic ancestors? And there's really two ways to answer this. There's an anthropological answer, and then there's a mythological answer. So anthropologically speaking, shamanism was a specific practice that came to being through thousands of years of continuous spiritual work. So in this sense, there is no such thing as a first shaman, because shamanism was developed through multiple generations adding on top of each other. Maybe at some point, someone learned about the spirits, and then several generations later, that original person who's now an ancestor speaks to their descendants, and the descendants can understand it. And then maybe several generations after that, those descendants learn how to induce trance, to speak directly, to invite them in. And then maybe, after several generations later, full transpossession could happen. So this is the journey. So essentially, in this explanation, there's no such thing as the first shaman. It's basically was honed through generations. Now, the mythological explanation is actually a little bit more complex. I don't write too much about it because every tribe has a different story of the first shaman. But in almost every case, the first shaman was not even human, but it was actually a spirit who came down and took on physical form. Or it was a child that was born from a union between a spirit and a human. In these stories, a spirit usually comes down to instruct the people in shamanism to remedy a great imbalance in the world, such as raging warfare, pollution of the land, disrespect to the spirits, or widespread suffering. In Manchu belief, which is my ancestral belief, there's a spirit known as the Eagle Mother, who comes down and nurses the first shaman by feeding her what's called divine essence, or divine food, basically breastfeeding from the Eagle Mother. And then trains her in shamanism to help humans keep peace, following an event that was the cataclysmic war between heaven and the demons. And fun thing, I mentioned this in the podcast, and I think it's fun to mention again. Technically, it's not very well known. The word shaman or saman, as it was originally formed from, is technically a male word, a masculine word. In the original languages where the word saman comes from, so I didn't mention this earlier, but the word shaman actually comes from Siberia. It comes from a set of Tungusic tribes. So no Native American tribes use this word, no indigenous tribes in the Americas, North, South, Africa, none of them recognize this word. It's a North Asian word, and it's a male word. In the original Tungusic languages, male shamans were referred to by this term, but in fact, the word for a male shaman is extremely diverse among North Asian cultures. Among Mongols, it's Bokh or Bokh Morgul, and among the Turkic people such as the Tuvans and the Altai's known as Kam, Baxi among the Kyrgyz people, completely different words. But the word for a female shaman is the same across all of these cultures. The word for a female shaman is so likely derived from the same root. So within the Tungus languages, it's known as Utugan or Otugan. In Mongolian, Utkan. Among the Siberian Buryats, Otkon. Among the Turkic peoples, Utagan. So it's basically the same word across all these cultures. It's likely based on the ancient Turkic word for the earth goddess, which is Etken. But what this implies is that the words for a female shaman are the same across all these cultures. The word for male shaman is different. that implies that the words for female shaman come from a singular source, and therefore it's much older than the word for male shamans, which of course then implies that female shamans were, how do I write it, because I'm having a brain fart, in terms that so it implies that the first shamans were actually women, and male shamans actually appeared much later in history. So really the only reason why the word shaman is popular in Europe and the US is because the first explorers, the Russians and the Dutch, they only bothered to talk to the male shamans. They did not bother to talk to the female shamans. So they asked the male shamans, what are you? It's like, shaman. And so that was the word that then came to the West, and that was the word that became popular. So, cool. Yeah. And then, how are we on time? We have 10 more minutes.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. So the other part that we were thinking about talking about is, the typical structure for an offering prayer ceremony. I do have it written out in the book. But I guess, do people have questions they want to ask first before I go into that, or?
We don't have any questions in the chat, but we do have some commentary.
Okay.
Cynthia said in regard to the New Agers that are holding these improper initiations, scammers gonna scam.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, the saddest thing. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, have you ever met someone who identified as an Udugan?
So basically, all female shamans still use that word in these traditional cultures. So actually, my friend, she actually, a very close friend of mine, she identifies as an Ulkan. And that's just, and for them, that's just that's just the word, the translation. It's basically, for them, Ulkan or Boch in Mongolia, Ulkan or Sama, it's all the same word to them. It's just, they just had a practice of using different words for the two genders. And I think, I don't know the reason why they decided to use the two word. Probably when male shamans appear, they're like, we're gonna call you something else, maybe.
Yeah, because this is the first time I'm ever hearing of it, so.
Yeah,
Same surprising.
Yeah. It's funny, that word is, within North Asia, it's much more common than the word shaman. In fact, when they use the word shaman, they think it's a Western word.
Oh, okay.
Because only one group of tribes use it. The other tribes, they don't recognize that word.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So they're like, I guess the English translation for what I do is called shaman, and they are technically correct because it falls within the same family of practices. What was I going to say earlier?
You were gonna give us a list of the different rituals.
Oh, I guess I'll describe the offering prayer ceremony. So this is basically, within our traditions, giving offerings is kind of considered the bread and butter of what we do. Basically, what we do is largely based off of building relationships with the spirits that are with us, whether they are shamanic spirits or not. And that's considered for us the foundation of all other spiritual and magical practices, because without that, we're considered to be pretty weak in our practice. So on page 202, I give the instructions for an offering prayer ceremony. So, prayer is an integral part of all spiritual traditions. In North Asia, practitioners frequently perform a somewhat structured prayer ceremony that is combined with offerings, giving gifts to spirits and gods, while simultaneously asking for blessings, protection, health, prosperity from all of them at once. So just to highlight how practical we are. So basically our prayer ceremony addresses all of the gods and spirits at once, gives all of the offerings at once, and then the things that you want to request or ask for are all done at once. So basically it's all done in one ceremony just to get it done. Because we're very practical like that. So as with every working, this ceremony should be preceded by a smoke cleansing. Basically, you should cleanse yourself spiritually before then. Then lay out the offerings in ceremonial cups or bowls and sprinkle a small pinch of a cleansing herb into each one to purify the offering. So this is something that I think is pretty unique to North Asia. Whenever we give offerings, whatever herb that we use for cleansing, we basically sprinkle a little bit of that onto the offerings, so into the milk, onto the cookies, all that. That's considered to help purify those offerings. And also the herb is also considered an offering in itself as well. So although this ceremony does not require heavy protection, it never hurts to set up spiritual safeguards, either through protected amulets or in the Western style by passing a circle. So if you don't have like something like this or whatever, it's using Western methods for protection. Well, it's basically what you have, so it's what you use.
Right.
In North Asia, practitioners typically wear mirrors and cover their crowns with a simple hat. So we normally wear a hat when we do this, or for all ceremonies. Well, no. For ceremonies where we don't want to induce full possession, we wear a hat to help prevent it from happening. So if performing the ceremony inside, you would uncover the altar holding your spirit representations, if you normally keep it covered, and begin by reciting a prayer to the higher powers, basically starting with the most supreme and then going down to the lowest, and then inviting each god or spirit one by one, announce your offerings, and then ask them to answer your prayers. So these are the words that I have. I don't always use these exact words. We actually recommend people to not memorize word for word what their prayers are. It's basically, part of it is supposed to be freeform and spontaneous, but as long as you know the structure. So it begins with, I bow and give respect to the highest being, the master of heaven. Sometimes I say Lord of heaven, whatever. I invite you to come and accept my humble offerings. We welcome you and your glory. I call the great star spirits that shine to us our destinies, the North Star, the Big Dipper, Orion's Belt, and others. Obviously using Western names here. I call the beloved ancestral spirits, my grandfather and grandmother spirits, and then Mongols will say my father and mother spirits, who watch over me unconditionally. I invite the heavenly beings and gods, both wrathful and gentle, and beg for your kindness and favor. Everything here was towards the heavenly. The next part is more earthly. I bow and give respect to the Earth Mother, whose breath gave me form. I call to the land spirits, the Nagas and sprites who rule the shimmering kingdom of water, the Earth Lords who rule the strong, rugged kingdom of mountains. May your magnificence never diminish, may your wonders ever inspire. From the smallest plants to the rushing rivers, to the mighty forests, mountains, and caverns, please bless us with health and fortune. Because this part deals with land spirits, we have actually cultural belief that land spirits are easily offended, so you want to really shower them with compliments. So you'll notice that part was the most sort of flowery, like be like, oh, you're so beautiful. The next part, I beg the presence of Omoshimama, the Manchu goddess of life. May your willows grow strong yet graceful, and may your fires never falter. With your rope, tighten my bonds with family and friends as you do with all life. Strengthen my household fire as you do with the fires of the middle world. Watch over our children as they are born and grow, and our elderly before they return to you. So comment on this part. I wrote in this very Manchu specific portion. I'll tell you guys now that actually this part my friend in Mongolia asked me to change, because originally this part is mentioning generic fire spirits, because we have a belief that all communities, including the family, but all communities have an inherent fire spirit that we basically pray to just strengthen the bonds within the family and strengthen their livelihoods. But she thought that was a little bit too Mongol specific. She asked me to change it. So I replaced it with a Manchu goddess, which is the goddess of life. And one thing I'll make a commentary on is that if you take a look at different gods of life or goddesses of life, spirits of life, you notice that a lot of them tend to have a fiery aspect to them. And I think this is not a coincidence. I have the one here, but I noticed some of the ones in European traditions that come to mind, Bridget as well, goddess of life, or even Hestia, or Frigga in the Norse. So I noticed that for us, we refer to them more as fire gods and fire goddesses, but they are more like gods of life, and they have all the fiery aspects. So this is why I want to explain that part a little bit here. So, to all the spirits called, please accept these offerings. I offer you the purest untouched milk, the white life essence of nature. I offer the blue-green smoke of my herbs as it rises to the highest heavens. And other offerings, you can just list them. Please accept these offerings evenly and fairly without ignoring any. Basically saying, I'm giving offerings to all of you.
Right.
So you can all have some. To all the spirits and gods I have called, please grant to us your protection and blessings. Forgive the trespasses and mistakes I have committed, for I am silly and stupid. This is the humility part of humans. And in your kindness, grant us health and prosperity. Protect me from calamities, both physical and spiritual, and guide me when I am lost. Allow true friends to share my table and turn away my enemies' eyes. Open the roads to opportunity so that I may flourish and present offerings to you again. May my wishes be granted, so shall it be. It was a little bit of witchcraft language there. So, I mean, I explained it a little bit, but the next part, basically, I just kind of explained. Note that this prayer begins with an invocation to the Master of Heaven. I kept the wording gender neutral, as the Master of Heaven can be male or female, depending on the cultural tradition. And then next, I invoked the star spirits. And although different cultures honor different stars, the ones I named here are pretty notable ones, even in their Western names. And, star prayer is a pretty, universal ancient practice. Even, I write in here, even in Western fairy tales, first star I see tonight. It's a pretty common thing. And I actually wrote this just partially to satisfy my friend because she thought I was getting a little specific there. There was a lot of back and forth on what I could include. Then I invoke the ancestral spirits, and these can be general ancestral spirits as well as shamanic spirits. And then afterwards, all other relevant sky spirits and heavenly gods are invoked. And so we actually separate a lot of higher powers and gods into like the heavenly based ones, the earthly based ones, etc. So then after this section, I called upon the Earth Mother and invoked the land spirits using compliments and flattery. As we have seen, land spirits are vain and materialistic. So any work with that must contain words that describe their majesty, their brilliance, the wealth and beauty of the natural world. And then I follow this up in the next section with a direct invocation to the Manchu goddess of life, who oversees all life in the world, including birth and death. Now, she specifically is associated with the willow tree, and although she's not specifically a fire goddess, she feeds spiritual fires and strengthens family and household bonds. And I also wrote here, I included her because she is what we call a domestic spirit and not a wild spirit, which means she can be invoked through prayers. Wild spirits can only be invoked through trance, which actually increases the risk. So the ceremony I include here is a safe ceremony.
Okay.
Just like gaping. And then after that section, I encourage people to any other gods or spirits that they believe weren't grouped in the previous groups can also just be listed and mentioned here. So this is meant to be practical. If you work with a lot of other spirits, like for example, we as a culture, we never invoke spirits from what we call the lower world. But if people want to work with, let's just say Persephone or whatever, they can add those in specifically. But this basically is meant to be an umbrella of all the spirits that in the heavens and all the spirits that are in the earth are included already, but additional ones can be added. So, going on, next I give offerings of milk and juniper, but you can add any other offerings you feel are appropriate. I sometimes also include barley, cookies, nuts, and unwrapped candies. You can also offer cooked dishes, but usually these are reserved for more complex ceremonies. And I clearly state that these offerings are for all the spirits and ask to share them equally. And then if you wish to invoke other spirits, you can add additional, I mentioned that already. One explanation why we use milk and juniper a lot specifically. Milk is considered to be an essence of life. It's something that is fed to newborn babies. And also we consider it to be representative of motherly love as well. So that's why, actually in Mongolia, they offer milk, and they throw milk around all the time. It's actually insane. There's lactose intolerant because there's a bacteria that eats the lactose there because milk gets thrown around every day all the time. It's crazy. And then juniper is So we actually, I have an explanation. We primarily use juniper for cleansing. Juniper is considered to be a powerful cleansing herb that is also pleasing to the spirits. So we offer as both cleansing and as an offering. Obviously, for all peoples, what we generally encourage is that we encourage people to use or to focus on herbs that either their ancestors used or that grow naturally on the land that they are on.
Right.
Because if you're using the herbs that your ancestors use, you're able to better tap into the ancestral powers. But if you use the spirits of the land you grow on, you're basically tapping into the local land spirits.
Yeah.
So we believe that these will, you can use other herbs obviously if you want, but we believe that using these herbs will work especially well for you. So once all of your offerings have been presented, tell the spirits what you want. The prayer above basically asks for health, prosperity, protection, blessing, generic things. Generally wishing for your aspirations to come true, but if you have a specific request, you can obviously just add that into the prayer. The shamans and elders of North Asia believe that prayers are best said spontaneously and strongly advise against memorizing them, as this can limit their effectiveness. So every time I perform this offering ceremony, I say the prayer a little bit differently. And actually, one thing I took out of this prayer ceremony is that this is a habit from the Mongols, but after each section, basically after each group of spirits is called, we hold our hands up and we say shuk, 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 shuk. We say the word shuk, like shuk, 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 shuk. This word is also considered to be a word of power that's also, it calms the spirit. So if any spirits were a little bit uncalm, this word can help, it pleases them. So and then after saying the prayer, I basically formally present the offerings. For the liquid offerings, I actually they're usually in the bowl, and I basically use a special type of spoon or a sprinkle herb and basically just toss it, like sprinkle it upwards, and then basically generally when we're presenting offerings to the sky-based spirits, we'll toss them upwards. For the land-based spirits, we toss them forwards. Let's see anything else here. And then one thing that I learned from experience. So when you toss your offerings, make sure you do it in each of the 4 cardinal directions, not just in one direction. Because otherwise, spirits from the neglected directions, they might get jealous or they may feel insulted that you didn't give an offering to them. I did not know this years ago. And so I was wondering why every time I finish an offering ceremony, I would go home and I would pass out for 16 hours. Yeah, it's basically they're going, it's the spirit's punishing me for the offense. So I actually said right here, I used to throw offerings only toward the north for simplicity, even when outside, but immediately after returning home, I either collapsed in exhaustion or was struck with short-term sickness. Once I start giving offerings to all 4 directions, this no longer happened. So, food offerings like grain, cookies, or candies should be given in a similar manner. If you're using a cooked dish, you would have to present it with both hands and then leave it somewhere out in nature near a tree or body of water, or leave a little bit and take the rest home. If there are attendees, actually you can share the cooked offerings with the attendees. And also, I include a taboo here. If you're performing the ceremony by a body of water, never toss or pour your offerings directly into the water. Instead, place or pour them like a little small distance away. Basically, it's also considered insulting to the water-based spirits if you sort of mix other things into that water. So you want to keep it nearby, but not directly in the water. So when your offerings have been given, pay respects in an appropriate manner, and you can just leave. So that's basically I would say for me, 85% of what I do on a regular basis is either offerings and cleansings. And then the other 15% is just other things. I actually also later here I include a fire ceremony, which is basically any type of work that you want to do, whether it's spiritual, magical, or spell work. We pretty much do it through a fire ceremony. Basically, it's kind of universal for everything. Obviously, it's a little bit complicated, so if there's a simpler one in the witchcraft tradition, I'll just go with the witchcraft way of doing it. Light a candle is a lot easier than a full fire ceremony.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, any questions on anything?
Yeah.
How often would you perform the prayer ceremony?
So I personally, well, everyone's gonna say something different. I actually every month I go out into Central Park and I do it in the Ramble over there. So for me, I do it in the monthly thing. Many people have told me it's barely enough because people are like, you should do it more often, coming from people I know in Mongolia. But because of living in a concrete city, doing it once a month kind of checks out. Funny story, last year I was super busy during the fall season and I didn't do it for a few months. And so, I actually had a video chat with my Darha friend, the shaman friend, and halfway through she just asked, David, why haven't you been giving offerings? And she was like, yeah, your spirits are not very happy right now. I can see it. They're telling you need to go. So I'm like, I did not need this moment of psychness from you right now.
And that stretches.
Is it better to do it on land away from where you live, or is it okay to do it on your own property?
So traditionally, people have gone to a little bit of a distance away, but nowadays people do it on their own property. Yeah, generally it's fine to do it on your own property, especially if you use your own property for spiritual work anyways. In the past, they usually did it a distance away because while we have deep respect for the land spirits, we don't really worship them as much as treat them as very powerful neighbors. And so we didn't want land spirits to come into our homes. Basically, we offer them outside, so that's why it was traditionally these offerings were done a little distance away. But even on your own property, it's fine. So this is also actually a nuance. When we work with land spirits, we typically do it outside. We generally don't do it when we're indoors. It's basically every other spirit except land spirits. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a couple questions from the coven. One of them is, do you know of any other traditions outside of North Asia that have shamans?
So this is a really complicated question. I have seen instances where certain traditions are very, very close. Shaman adjacent might potentially be shamans, but they're very kind of isolated. So here's what I'll say. Within Europe, the two traditions that I've seen that actually could be related, could be descended from, the same things that we're descended from are the Sami in northern Scandinavia, as well as the Hungarians, the pre-Christian Hungarian tradition. Those traditions to us seem distinctly shamanic. Ironically, those are the two European cultures that are not Indo-European, so there might have been a connection there. Within Southeast Asia, there are traditions that popped up, like the Hmong people. I would actually consider Hmong traditions to be shamanic. Some of the other ones I'm less familiar with, but when I see it, it looks kind of familiar to me. Within South America, I would say only in the West Amazon, they've developed a similar shamanic relationship to specific plant spirits there, in which they're what they call the plant spirits. When we observe them, we see that it's been tied to their bloodline. So, in which case, it's become an ancestral spiritual connection through those plant spirits. So that we would probably consider shamanic. Within North America, in terms of the native traditions, the only ones that we actually really believe are shamanic are the northwestern ones in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. Their traditions are shamanic. Some of the other traditions are very animistic and spiritual, but they don't have that same type of shamanic relationship with their spirits, although they do have powerful relationships. It just doesn't work in the same way. In the Great Lakes region, we see some traditions that are similar. We wouldn't say it's shamanic, but we say they have a similar relationship. And Africa is very, very hard to describe because Africa is extremely diverse.
Right.
I would say in West Africa, ironically, I would say the Yoruba are not, but the neighboring Dagara might be.
Okay.
Within Central Africa, I have no idea. I think probably not, but no idea. East Africa, no idea. In Southern Africa, some Sangomas we would consider to be shamans, not all. And the reason I say this is because the word Sangoma in South Africa has become an umbrella term where any type of spiritual elder is called a Sangoma nowadays. So the herbalist who provides like herbs for spiritual purposes is called a Sangoma.
Right.
But I would say the Sangoma specifically that go into trance possession states, and their spirits are actually a lot of their spirits are ancestral. So which those cases I think they might be shamans.
Okay. There's another question related to animism from Nuri, and it's, I'm curious to know if within North Asian shamanism, if animism is still intertwined with the beliefs
yes.
as well.
So all shamanism is animism.
Okay.
So basically, shamanism can only develop from an animistic framework.
Right.
Because animism is the belief that there are spirits everywhere and we interact with them. Shamanism is a specific form of animism, I would actually say. It's a specific form of interacting with spirits. Now, you know, with North Asia, because we are almost like a stereotypical Asian tradition, we're very kind of stranger danger in general with people and with spirits. This is why people think we're unfriendly, because we're very stranger danger with everything. So even with spirits, that's why we only really trust ancestral spirits, and then we work with land spirits because we have to, and then we only trust ancestral spirits. And there are certain gods that we trust, but most spirits we actually don't trust. So we see a lot of animistic traditions, whether ancient or new age in other parts of the world, where they're a lot more friendlier with like stranger spirits, which we consider to be like, no, but
Dangerous. Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's actually I think socially that's one of the reasons why, you know, like I hear it all the time. People are like, oh, Asians are not friendly people. No, we're just very stranger conscious.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why we're not a very expressive people.
That makes sense to me. Are there any other questions, guys? No? Okay. Well, let's give a round of applause to David.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely incredible. Super, super informative. I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for this. This is knowledge that I certainly didn't have. I don't know anyone else personally that has it. So I want to thank you for all that you are doing to make sure that folks over here in the West have a really good understanding of what shamanism is all about, its origins, and what it means to carry these lineages into this, you know, this modern world that we're in. So I want to thank you so much for that. Thank all of you guys for your great questions, for all the attention that you gave, David. I really appreciate it so much. And I want to thank our virtual Coven community for participating in this and for asking questions as well. Again, I am Allie, owner of BronxWitch HeadQuarters. If you guys need me for anything, feel free to reach out. You can keep in touch with us in our virtual Coven community, which is accessible from our website, and look forward to more book signings and more events, perhaps having David back for the next book or the next event. We'd love to have you again. Thank you everyone so much. Please enjoy the tea, the cookies, and everything like that. Don't rush out. Enjoy yourselves. Take a look around the shop, and I and Nuri are here to help you.
Yeah. Feel free for everyone to follow me on Instagram, whether here or online.
Yes.
So my Instagram is actually, it's in the book, but it's DAVIDJSHI311. So.
Got it.
And for you two, because it's Lunar New Year, I actually did have Lunar New Year gifts. So I didn't know how many people were coming, so I prepared more. So feel free to take whichever one you like.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow, thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'll actually tell you what's inside. Inside, I included a bill, like a currency bill from Mongolia, as well as one from probably China, but possibly another country. And the bell that's inside is actually a protective tiger bell, which I actually reactivated yesterday to provide protection, well, last night at midnight, to offer protection for up to 2 years.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Oh
so
my God.
much.
Thank you.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, and Ali, specifically for you, because you invited me here. So this is a traditional prayer scarf that we normally offer, you know, as blessings. That's on it. There's the 8 Buddhist treasures are stamped onto it.
Wow.
And basically, the way this works is you can basically offer prayers, wishes into it, and then you can just hang it wherever. If wind blows, it basically carries the prayers out. So that's what it acts like.
Oh my gosh.
So basically, the way we present it, like
Thank
this.
you.
Mhm.
Oh wow, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's so special.
Oh
Oh
my
my
goodness.
goodness, I want to go put myself like in a box. Nobody touch it. Thank you so much. What an honor. I truly, truly appreciate this so much. It will definitely have a special place in my home, by my altar. I already know where it's gonna go. So thank you so, so much. Yay! Thank you, everybody. Woo! Okay, I'm gonna open up the door. Enjoy, mingle. Thank you, Coven community. Bye.